This is Kenny Tian. Welcome to Real Estate License in 14 Weeks. This is episode 36 of Starting from Zero. Today we start chapter 11. If you like my video, please give me a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel, hit the bell for further notification, and share this video with someone else. State Subdivision Map Act. If a developer wants to develop a piece of property, usually it will involve some kind of subdivision. Now, subdivision can be physical division of a big piece of land. For example, a developer wants to invest in a vacant lot, and let's say it is a 5-acre lot. Of the 5-acre lot, he may decide to build 20 homes to 30 homes. In order to build so many number of homes, he has to cut out the big piece of land into smaller pieces. We call that subdivision. Another type of subdivision does not involve physical division of a piece of land. It could be that a developer is interested in converting an apartment complex. As you know, an apartment complex is under one ownership. An apartment complex may have 50 units. If a developer wants to buy this property, initially he will have sole ownership. And if he converts it into individual condos, he can actually sell these apartment units individually, which will give rise to 50 ownership, for example. That is the type of subdivision that does not involve physical division of a property. So there are two ways to subdivide property. A property can be subdivided either because it's unimproved, like the one that I just gave you in the first example, or improve, like the example that I just gave you. The State Subdivision Map Act gives the local government direct control over the types or kinds of subdivision that they will allow in their cities. The city has the right to make planning for the sewer needed, utility, earthquake safety, and other types of public health and safety concern. There are two types of maps that must be prepared if a developer wants to apply for subdivision. The first type of map is called the Parcel Map. Now, for the Parcel Map, it is only limited to subdivisions of 4 subdivided units or less. In other words, if it's 4 or less subdivision, the developer is required to prepare Parcel Map. And if it is a subdivision that involves 5 or more subdivisions, developer has to prepare what we call a final map. In order to go through the process, the developer will have to go through 5 steps. Each step would involve the local city. Now, even though the name of the law is State Subdivision Map Act, the application is not made to the state of California. The application is either made to the local city or to the county if the city is not incorporated. An unincorporated city is one that does not have its own city hall or planning department. So it's either made to the city or to the county. The 5 steps that are involved in applying for a subdivision are: number 1, prepare tentative map. Number 2, file the tentative map with the local planning agency. Number 3, prepare final map. Number 4, obtain certificates. Number 5, record the approved final map. So it only takes 5 steps to complete the subdivision process. Now, let's talk about housing and construction. Housing and construction is also part of public control, as was the Subdivision Map Act. That's also a public control. In the case of state housing law, what is state housing law? State housing law provides minimum occupancy and construction requirements. Under the state housing law, city or county may have more stringent requirements. At the local level, usually the state housing law is handled or enforced by the building inspector. Now, if you have ever done building construction before, you probably had the experience of building inspector from the city to come to the construction site and put his signature on the what they call the signature card. The signature card is for the building inspector to put his signature on the card to indicate certain part of the construction has passed inspection. So he indicates what day it passed inspection. Next, local building codes. Each city or county may have their own local building codes. And these building codes, if it's in conflict with the state housing law, in other words, the local building code is in conflict with the California building code, usually you go with the more stringent one, which is the stricter one. Next, the contractor state licensing law. In California, all the general contractors and subcontractors are required to be licensed for a work of improvement if the value of the work of improvement is $500 or more. General plan. What is a general plan? General plan are long-term plans by local city or county. The purpose of a general plan is for the city to have long-term planning. If a developer wants to develop a piece of land, if the zoning is not right, for example, if the developer wants to build a commercial development in a residential development, and developer needs to rezone the property, the zoning for the property from residential to commercial. So for any rezoning, the developer needs to file the application with the city. While in determining whether or not to approve the rezoning, the city would have to look at the general plan because the zoning and subdivision must be consistent with the general plan. Previously, we've already discussed about zoning. Just as a reminder, zoning is the legal tool that allows city to carry out its general plans. Now let's talk about the concept of grandfather. All the stuff that we've already talked about zoning, we're not going to repeat. So let's talk about grandfather. What does grandfather mean? Grandfather means is that the new zoning law allows existing non-conforming use to continue. What that means is if a structure was constructed based on the old ordinance or old zoning law, even after there is a new zoning law, the city still allow that structure to continue as an exception. I'll give you an example. Now, many years ago, I had a case where my client was in an unfortunate situation. A truck that was driving on a road next to his house actually hit the overhang wire because the truck had something protruding from the truck that actually hit the overhang wire. As a result, the transmission post collapsed and damaged his garage. Now his garage was built in the 1930s. So that was built under the old zoning law. But the new zoning law would have required him to change his structure. But the problem is that in his situation, he could not comply with the new zoning law because of certain dimensions about his garage. So fortunately for him, he could make use of the grandfather clause. So he doesn't have to comply with the new law. So it's just the exception. Subdivided Lands Act, also known as California Real Estate Law. It is very important that you remember names that are interchangeable. For example, Subdivided Lands Act is also known as the California Real Estate Law. Well, why is it important to know the names that are interchangeable? Because in exam, they often use the other name. So if they're talking about California Real Estate Law, you need to know that they're talking about the Subdivided Lands Act. Subdivided Lands Act regulates sales of subdivisions. It does not regulate planning, design, or construction of subdivisions. So it's a different type of regulation, just the sale. If a developer wants to develop a piece of property and he has a choice of subdividing the lot into a 4-unit construction or 5-unit construction, assuming that it's possible to do a 5 or 4, Now, if he does a 4 units, he doesn't have to make the application to the Department of Real Estate. But if he decides to build 5 units, the Subdivided Lands Act requires that he makes an application to the Department of Real Estate to allow the properties to be sold. 5 or more require submission to the Department of Real Estate because he needs to comply with the Subdivided Lands Act. Well, there are a couple important things about the Subdivided Lands Act. Number one, it requires the developer to provide certain types of reports to the consumer when they bought the new homes. Now, if you ever bought a new home, you probably may have received what we call public reports. There are 2 types of public reports. First type of public report is called the preliminary public report. Now, because the preliminary public report is pink in color, we also call that pink report. The second type of public report is known as the final public report. The final public report is white in color, so because of the color, we also call the final public report a white report. Well, the difference between the pink report and the white report is that for the pink report, because it is not final, it's only preliminary, a developer cannot sign purchase contract with the buyer if it has not received the white report yet. The only thing the developer can do is to accept reservation from the buyer. Just reservation, no signing of purchase contract. In the case of the final public report, which is white color, a developer can sign purchase contract with the buyer. So that's the difference between a pink report and a white report. For both the pink report and the white report, the law requires that the developer or the builder gives a copy of the report to the consumer before the consumer gives the deposit in the case of a pink report, or before the consumer signs the purchase contract in the case of the final report. Now, on top of that, the law also requires that the developer get a receipt from the consumer that the consumer has read and received the report. Quite often in the industry, we come across builders that only have the buyer sign the receipt, but they never gave a copy of either the pink report or the white report to the consumer, and that is in violation of the law because the consumer is supposed to have a copy of the report, read the report, and then sign the receipt. But sometimes the salespeople at the sales office for the builders, all they do is just have the consumer sign the receipt, but they never gave a copy of these reports to the consumer. So because sometimes consumers don't get a copy, they can use that as an excuse to get out of a purchase contract if for whatever reason they could not get their loan or they changed their mind about getting their property. Desist and refrain order. If the commissioner finds that the developer is in violation of subdivision law, such as the case where I just described, they don't give consumers copies of the reports and then have them sign receipt and take their deposit or sign the purchase contract. In that case, if it's reported to the commissioner, then the commissioner may decide to issue what is known as a cease. If the consumer finds that the builder is in violation of the subdivision law, then the commissioner may issue what is known as a desist and refrain order. That means that the builder must stop everything. They cannot do any more sale on the property until the investigation is completed or until the builder has complied with the subdivision law. This is the end of episode 36 of Starting from Zero. See you next time.